This is the most addicting mod pack. The combination of One Tree, Skyblock, Create Mod, and Gregtech produces a gameplay loop so addicting it should be considered illegal. The entire pack is like a giant complicated clicker game. Hear me out. In Cookie Clicker, you click on the cookie to get cookies, to buy upgrades, to get more cookies. In this pack, you get resources to make machines, to make resources to make more machines, and the chemical imbalances inside of my brain bark like a dog for that kind of gameplay loop. So when I learned about star technology through fellow YouTuber Melbourne Without Coffee, I knew I had to start a playthrough. And what a start it was with an instant sapling and turning off auto jump because it sucks. I used Ultimine to fell the first of many trees and reinvest all of our saplings to the effort. What effort is that? Chapter 1. This mess of arrows and nodes forewarns us of the insanity we must endure to craft our first circuits of the pack, and of course it begins with dirt and worms. But first we need some more space. So, like a good Skyblock boy, I begin to lay down bottom slabs, efficient, mob-proof, and ugly. Then, a ritual as old as time. Twerking to grow the trees. This time though, instead of chopping the logs and hoping for saplings, I make a crook, a tool that will increase the gain of saplings from my leaves and net me yummy and important worms. In order to get some quest rewards out of the way, I craft up our first 3 machines, the sieve, the barrel, and the cauldron. I also realize this pack is completely viable in peaceful mode, and I don't need ugly bottom slabs. So, I decide to raise the floor level of my life by 0.5, and while I do so, I let my wormy friends loose in the leaves of my latest batch of trees. After a really short amount of time, it looks like Christmas came early, but it's actually just worms. These are infested leaves, and breaking them nets an ungodly amount of string, an essential material for the dirt loop and the catalyst for a growing chess monster. But with string, we can really get started. Using excess saplings, we stuff those into a barrel, and it converts it into dirt. Then we can make the string mesh and slot it into our sieve, and running dirt through a sieve nets us enormous quantities of stones, saplings, and other organic materials. So immediately, from nothing more than 1 tree, we have our first cobblestone, but we need more. Time to expand the operation. More barrels, more sieves, more meshes, more resources. I can feel the chemicals in my brain screaming for more, and I must abide. Making dirt out of saplings is only the beginning, you see. As many are aware, you can duplicate dirt by making it into coarse dirt and tilling it, but star technology takes it one step further. But how to get gravel? Hammers, of course. We can use our big strong muscles to smash cobblestone right into gravel. With gravel, we can make coarse dirt and then sieve that coarse dirt to get more dirt back than we put in, and even a chance at our gravel too. So now we duplicate dirt and sieve it for cobblestone and crush the cobblestone for gravel and use that to duplicate dirt, and it goes on and on and on, all while my storage space continues to shrink. I go on to make our first furnace and begin to produce some charcoal in order to get smelting action going. At this point, we have some options on what we want to do, but I think the obvious project is automating cobblestone to free us from the sifting loop. Cobblestone generators need lava, of course, and we can make lava inside of a fired crucible, which is easy enough. We just need some clay and some bone meal. Bone meal comes from the composter, and clay balls we get from hammering gravel into sand into dust and submerging that in a barrel of water, which we don't have, and takes forever to drain from saplings. Okay, we should probably do something while we wait. Well, if water's our issue, why not the aqueous accumulator? A block that generates water from being inside of it. It's not too expensive, but it does need glass. And if you think glass comes from sand in a furnace, you're an idiot. You're a moron. That's not realistic enough. Welcome to one of the first Gregified items. In fact, we need iron before we can even think of glass, you moron. So I sieve up some gravel to extract tasty crushed ores, including magnetite and iron, which both give iron ingots when smelted. After a little base expansion and our first bucket of water is ready, our iron is finished smelting and ready to be turned into the first of many Gregtech tools, the mortar and pestle. We use the mortar to crush sand into quartz sand. Then we extract some flint from gravel and mortar that into flint dust. Then we separate that flint dust into tiny piles of flint and use them to purify the quartz sand into glass sand. And if you think we use that in a furnace, you're wrong. It obviously goes on a campfire where it makes the most sense. And glass is as easy as that. The other materials like lead and redstone all come from more crushing and more sieving, but the plates are a different story. In most Gregtech packs, to make plates before you have access to machines, you use a Gregtech hammer to smash 2 ingots into 1 plate, which is a sucky ratio. But here we can use our advanced Create Mod brains to use mechanical presses to get a 1-to-1 ratio before we have access to machines. And since our andesite comes from the infinite dirt loop, we have plenty to turn into alloy and get our tootsies wet with rotational goodness. And why don't you dip those tootsies onto the subscribe button if you're enjoying the video? A wink. And after all that effort, we've got an infinite water source, but cooler. It's not needed now, but it will be super helpful in just a bit. Editor's note, put like a toaster oven ding in this part. And what could that be? Our second bucket of water is done. What were we doing with it? Oh, right, clay. Dust into water, and ta-da! Combining the clay balls and bone meal, we get porcelain clay, which we then make into an unfired crucible and cook that into a fired one. Lava is on the horizon, baby. All we need to do is set that over a heat source like our lovely campfire over here and fill it up with cobblestone. And much like water, the lava will slowly extract, which is all good because there's more we have to do for a cobblestone generator. Stone barrels are like barrels, but instead of dirt generators, they're cobblestone generators. We'll need to extract items automatically from them, and since hoppers are beyond annoying to craft in this pack, we'll use Create Mod chutes, which retain their vanilla recipes. At this point, our lava's ready and needs to be placed on top of the stone barrel. Now, I have complete access to regular buckets at this point, but instead, I opt to use a wooden one to transport the lava, setting myself on fire and beginning a countdown to losing the bucket of lava and wasting a ton of my time. Thankfully, I think better when I'm panicking, and I get the lava placed down before losing it permanently, and we're that much closer to auto cobble. We just need to supply the barrel with an infinite water source. For that, we're going to exploit Create's simple fluid handling. All we have to do is take the copper we got earlier and smash it into plates and twist it into pipes and pumps, add in a couple of water wheels for good measure too, sprinkle a gear ratio here and there, and blammo! A functional cobblestone farm. I even expanded it from just one barrel. With infinite cobblestone, it's time to expand our metal supply, so more crushing and more sieving for me. It is pretty wasteful to actually be using a furnace, so I melt up some more lava and make ourselves a fancy automatic bulk smelter from Create. Fast, fuelless processing, my beloved. I now find myself with options again, so to fill the void, I decide we get some rubber in our lives. It's a very important material for lining cables and making belts. We need the arboreal extractor, which is mostly cheap, save for the iron gears, which requires a bit of Gregtech tool crafting. Remember the mortar and pestle from earlier? Well, it has a ton of friends to do a ton of different things. And for gears, we need a wrench and rods, which means we're about to dip our toes into the rabbit hole. A file is made from plates and can be used to make the aforementioned rods we need. This is both tedious and inefficient, but once we have our first machines, they'll be able to do it at a much nicer ratio. Thankfully, a wrench is also just made from plates, so we don't really have to get into the horrors of making screws yet. In any case, the arboreal extractors are finally ours, and for some reason must be placed exclusively on a jungle tree in order to generate latex. Slowly, so time to work on something else. I'd really like some better SU gen than just water wheels, and in this stage of the game that comes from diesel generators, the fuel for which we can make out of crops. Gregtech actually gives us an awesome multi-block for generating crops, the large farm. But in order to make the treated wood used to craft it, we actually need another Gregtech multi-block. Yeah, Gregtech has a lot of those. What we really need is a coke oven in order to make creosote, and it's made out of special bricks, so more clay for us. But thankfully, I can use our water pipes to make clay production a bit more bearable. But don't worry, because there's a multi-block structure for that too. More on that later. Coke bricks really aren't that bad to make, and after making 27 instead of 29 and fixing that little mistake, it's time to build our first multi-block. It's a box of bricks. They get more interesting later on, I swear. Logs go in, and charcoal and creosote come out. Also, this takes forever, and our latex isn't ready. Okay, so time to wait for creosote while waiting for latex. Let's get a mixing station set up for alloying. Much like the pump from earlier, I used excessive gear ratios to build this thing up, making it pretty bulky but very fast. And since there's no blazes in sight, we can use a primitive heater filled with charcoal and lit with a flint and steel to heat our basin enough for metalworking. For some reason, I decided to make bronze here, but we can also make brass for more advanced Create Mod components and other alloys we might need. And finally, our latex is done, so we can take full advantage of our new mixer and a dash of sulfur to cure our new raw rubber into newer regular rubber. Even better than that, our creosote is built up enough for me to make 8 treated wood planks. Yeah, we need a ton more of these though, so we're in the long run. Luckily, we've got plenty to occupy ourselves with because the Gregtech multi-blocks need special blocks for input and output. Well, not the coke oven, but it doesn't count. In Gregtech, there are many tiers of machinery. Low voltage, medium voltage, high voltage, etc., all abbreviated as LV, MV, HV, and so on and so forth. Inputs and outputs for multi-blocks adhere to the same tier system. There's even a ULV, or ultra low voltage tier as well, which is super cheap, but only has one slot, so if the recipe you're using produces more than one item, it doesn't work. Now that's key information that becomes relevant later, so remember that. For now though, I pursue ULV inputs and outputs, since LV requires steel, which is something we don't have. ULV only needs wrought iron, which I made earlier by cooking iron over a campfire. Pretty Pretty much any Gregtech machine is made from machine holes, which need cables, and for ULV, we need red alloy cables. Thanks to our mixer, we can make red alloy ingots, but tragedy strikes as we can't use the press to turn them into a 1-to-1 plate ratio. I have to use the 2-to-1 crafting table ratio. And worse, we have to turn those plates into wires, and we need a wire cutter. So deeper down the tool rabbit hole we go. Wire cutters require a screwdriver and a screw, which means we need a saw, and screws take forever to make, and just but it all pays off as we can now create those amazing red alloy wires we need and wrap them in the rubber we made earlier. Wrought iron also gets the 2-to-1 treatment, which really sucks as it takes 9 plates to make one ULV machine hole. But we suffer through it, and after making a second machine hole, we have both item input and output. Now here's a fun fact I didn't realize. At some point in the mod pack, I became able to buy the LV versions of a bunch of hashes from the shop, but I don't realize that until after the filming of this episode. Hooray! After all that effort, I have enough creosote to make a stack of treated planks, and we get to work on the large farm. I really like Gregtech multi-blocks. There's a general shape you have to adhere to, but your I/O can go wherever you want it, and when the machine is assembled, it remains blocks, but all of them get updated textures to look cohesive. The large farm takes 8 of any seed or crop and automatically and infinitely duplicates them and emits the dulcet tones of urination. Remember how you can't use multi-item outputs with ULV output hatches? Well, here's where that's relevant. Biodiesel, the fuel we're after, needs seeds, and seeds are a secondary output, which means I can't farm those here. For seeds, we need LV. We need steel. Steel is the major goal for Chapter 1, as it's the gateway drug to LV, but we're surprisingly close now. In fact, it's just barely out of reach, locked behind the primitive blast furnace. The PBF requires a stupid amount of clay, which I am unwilling to do by hand, so let's talk about that clay multi-block from earlier. The large barrel. It's a barrel, but it's larger, and since it's a multi-block, it can hold more water at once and more dust. So I'll just be able to drop a stack of the stuff off and it'll convert without me worrying about it. We have the creosote we need for the treated wood, so really all we need is more I/O for both items and fluids, so I drive myself insane with a big grinding session. Crushing, sifting, smelting, I live and I breathe the grind. I'm no longer in control of my body, you see. Gregtech has the wheels and it's not stopping anytime soon. After my stupor, I have plenty of resources and a large barrel to boot. And here's where that accumulator we made in the beginning gets real useful, as it auto-ejects the water inside of it, so we can place it on the fluid input of the machine and just not worry about it. And holy crap does this convert clay fast, complete with that terrible urination sound. Now the PBF is made from fire bricks, which is a combination of clay dust and bricks dust, so we use the mortar to grind up clay blocks and brick blocks and combine the dust together to get fire clay dust. Then we shape the fire clay dust in a mold and smelt up the raw bricks into fire bricks. After some cutting and sawing and crafting, we finally have the PBF, and I build it as soon as possible. In goes wrought iron and charcoal, out comes steel. Our dreams of better stress units and circuits are close now, but there's still more to do. With steel, we can easily make LV machine holes, especially because their wire is tin, which we have a 1-to-1 plate recipe for. With them, I fix our output issues, and we can now generate multi-item output recipes. Except this is the part where I realize I'm using pumpkins for seed production, so I had absolutely no reason to go on that adventure at all. At least we have steel, I guess. For the ethanol side of things, I'm gonna use potatoes. We need mechanical crafters in order to turn pumpkins into seeds, so we gotta get some rose quartz. That's actually gotten the normal way, combining quartz and redstone, and quartz we just get from sifting. So, easy peasy. We can press pumpkin seeds into seed oil, and ethanol comes from potatoes and bone meal, which also comes from the taters too. All I'm missing is a lid for the basin and, oh, it needs gold. We can't get gold from sifting right now. Instead, we need to process the ores we do have to get gold as a byproduct. And wouldn't you know it, it needs a multi-block. How many of these are there? The Kinetic Ore Factory is the first multi-block we use that combines Create and Gregtech. It needs crushed ore, water, and enough RPM to process ores, yielding about 50% more dusts than the ores we put in, and more importantly, it gives us tasty little byproducts like gold and nickel. And oh boy, it's made entirely out of fire bricks, so I get to make more of those. I sure am glad I get to make more fire bricks today. For some reason, I decided to power this thing at maximum RPM. It doesn't make it run any faster, I don't think, but it seemed cool at the time, so I wasted a ton of time building a max-size windmill and gear ratioing it up to 256 RPM. But with the RPM connected, I could finally send my ores to be processed, and after just a little bit of time, we saw our first gold dust. We are really starting to break into the LV chapter now, huh? With gold in our grubby little hands, we can get to making biodiesel. I opt to make a rotation speed controller to compact the machine and take a detour to get access to kelp in order to make funnels. The biodiesel machine is pretty simple, honestly. Pumpkins get crafted into seeds and pressed pressed into seed oil, then potatoes are turned into bone meal and combined with more potatoes in the basin to make ethanol. Mix those two together and bam, crude biodiesel. And this machine makes enough to power 6 huge diesel engines comfortably. We can finally cross better SU off the list. Last step, circuits. And with all the infrastructure we now have, that won't be too bad. We do need to take a detour for slime, which can be easily made in bulk by the large barrel, and good God, do we need an endless supply of plates for wires. But the huge diesel engines actually make that a lot faster. And for good measure, I make sure to waste a ton of steel by turning it into screws, which are useless, instead of bolts, which I needed. But after crafting various random materials, we can use our fleshy monkey hands to slap it all together into a completed low voltage circuit. The first of many. And yet the addiction demands ever more.